Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jay Wilson. I am a content creator here at Data Crew. I'm also the writer of this Python library called DomoLibrary, which I use to do a lot of automation tasks. Um, and just before Christmas, Israel came in with an interesting question that I was like, man, I got to take a look at this. So he was saying that he's trying to set up some governance for franchisees and restaurant level team members, presumably using Domo. And the problem or opportunity is that all of his data is arriving in data sets. Let me make sure I'm actually recording. Yeah, good. Um, that data set is coming in from his LMS and some other tools, and he wants to create some custom managed attributes that pulls information from the data set and updates Domo. He wants to um, populate some values like franchise name and store number, and create custom attributes and set up dynamic groups and PDP policies. Oof, that is a lot. I really get a kick out of when people are trying to stitch together different parts of Domo. And the opportunity or challenge is like sometimes Domo makes it easy and sometimes things are incredibly difficult. Um, but let's take a quick look here and kind of understand what he's trying to get into. So I'm going to do a quick Google here, Domo, KB, custom attributes. Let's see what Domo has to say about custom attributes. So a custom attribute is going to be a property of a user that you can configure. And that's going to be, some of them are going to be default attributes that are just there out of the box, and others of them are going to be, well, custom. And so, we can have, where can attributes arrive from? They can come from your IDP if you're using SSO, um, or they can be, where does it actually say it? It doesn't. They can come from your IDP, they can be stuff that Domo has available out of the box, and they can be custom attributes that you have created. Additionally, you can set who is allowed to update those attributes. So is it, again, only set by your IDP? Is anyone who has the grant edit users? Or is it managed, i.e., everybody else cannot update these properties, right? These are all questions that we kind of want to be thinking through as we're doing the thing. Let me come over here to Domo Community, and let's see that in the UI. By the way, if you're thinking like, okay, this doesn't apply to me, I think the reason why I was so interested is one of the questions that I have is I'm like, okay, who can I trust to be an administrator? The only people I can trust to be administrators are people who have gone through the training. So if I had a data set that said, okay, here's all of the training you've completed, could I build an automation that says, okay, you've completed this training, therefore I can trust you to be an admin? Or if I said, hey, who are the users that have XYZ property? A lot of this stuff is like very Domo specific and doesn't exist in like Active Directory or any of these places. So like, how could I build a data set that allows me to control some of these attributes that otherwise would not be available? All right, so if I pop into attribute management, this is where the user interface looks like. I was actually mistaken. Once upon a time, the only trusted attributes were from your SSO. But now, like I said, Domo has extended it so that I can create custom attributes that people that have that grant can manage, or if I disable this, anyone can update. Again, I can use these custom attributes to create PDP policies and dynamic groups. And again, that's why this is interesting. Now, my library allows us to create them via API. And again, I'm very much planning to use this for work. So let's come into Python here and let's talk through this little use case. So I have here my data set of interest. Again, I've got some users that I want to add into Domo. I want to make sure that these franchise and store properties get updated, and I want to be able to build out my hierarchy. Oh yeah, by the way, if I go and look at my profile, I have this random account that it reports into me, and that account has these sets of owners, and this owner has this set of restaurants, right? So again, I've updated the user profiles here in the Org Explorer also via API. I'm certainly not doing this by hand. And that's what this whole setup here is all about. What is 12? What? What is 12? 12 is a typo. Let's see that again and make sure that's been updated. Okay, good. All right. So let me save that. Close this. Let me clear all output and let's step through the code. All right, so this whole story begins. Again, I am using DomoLibrary for this. Make sure to run upgrade to DomoLibrary. I'm always releasing new features, patching bugs, finding bugs, and that's why we keep on running updates. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read in my data set. I am doing some light data cleansing to remove spaces from any fake email names just so that they work the way they're supposed to. And the result is a list of objects, which for display purposes I'm showing here as a data frame. But you can see here the first 5 rows. We're going to create a user called, well, CEO1. The role column I'm going to leave alone because theoretically, you'll have a role like administrator or read-only access or participant, whatever. You wouldn't create a role for each of these types of people. Um, but fields like franchise and store, if a person is associated with one franchise, which is associated with one store, to me, it kind of makes sense to put that information in your user profile. Maybe I was saying I would have a column called is training or is trained or hire date, right? Those types of properties I'm more likely to put in. But for the use case, right, having some dynamic properties and whatever, thought it might be interesting. And again, who is the manager? All right. Just to kick us off, we need to start with an access token or a way to authenticate in Domo. Am I recording still? Yes. Okay. And so we start by creating a token, an access token auth object. Now, one of the questions that came up recently in the forums was, well, how can I use client ID and secret with J's library? Well, you can't. Because client ID and secret only works with the documented APIs, and the documented APIs are a really small subset of all of the things you can do via API. And to do some of the more sophisticated things, you just need to use the access token, which you set up under, what is it, Domo admin, I think it's security access token. It's not client ID and secret. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that works. Then, like I said, I wanted to only do a subset of the properties, so I'm going to create a custom property, franchise ID, and store ID. Now, how do I do that? Well, in my library, there's a class called the instance config class, and part of instance config is to create these user attributes that we talked about. So I can come into Domo config, go to user attributes property, and choose upsert. And then if this property ID does not exist, it's going to go ahead and create this property with this description and that name. To allow me to do it all in a list, I'll say write a function called upsert properties. It's going to accept a list of properties, those 2 properties we're going to create. It's going to map over them and run upsert property. Once I run that, it's going to tell me, hopefully, success, right? Cool. From here, I'm able to go into attribute management, and I can see the franchise ID and somewhere the store. This manager is a mistake I made earlier, and I've got some test stuff from when I was practicing doing implementation. Cool, so these properties exist. One thing to note when you configure a property, you can change what data type it is. Like I said, you can explicitly set what source can update the property. But I'm kind of ignoring that for this back of napkin implementation use case. All right. Now, you might say, well, Jay, how do I use your library? Well, that's a great question. I would say go to the documentation. Jay Wilson does create documentation. if you go to the GitHub repo, there is a link that will show you uh, for each class, these are the functions that have been implemented. It will show you some sample code for how it works, but you can always click on the source button. You can always click on the source button, which will actually take you to the source code so you can actually see what's coming in and how it works if you can read Python. Cool. So now I've created my custom properties. The next thing we want to do is just really quickly validate that those properties have been created. So again, I can take the Domo instance config class. I can go to the user attributes property. I can run get attributes. And in my case, I added a quick filter that would only return properties whose ID starts with, in my case, FZ, so I could see my custom properties. If I set return all equals to true, it would obviously return all of the properties from Domo, including some of the managed email, employee number, hire date, and so on. Cool. So now we need to switch gears a little bit. We've created the custom attribute. And now we need to say, all right, let's create that user and assign the custom attribute whatever new value that I want to assign to it. Now, when I wrote this library, I initially didn't think of custom attributes and user attributes as the same thing. And so there are two classes that have a little bit of overlapping functionality. One of these days, I'll merge them into one class. But for now, just to keep backwards compatibility, I have them as two separate things. So we are going to have to switch gears here and talk about user properties now instead of user attributes. I know, it's dumb, but here we are. Cool. First thing to understand is there's a class, there's an enum called user property type. An enum is a list of valid things. So like a list of valid properties might include username, password, reports to, location, right? These are default Domo properties. But for us, we have these extended properties. And so to work with that, we have to use the enum class, which will allow us to extend an enum. So what are the predefined values? The predefined values, like I said, email, phone number, title, landing page, hire to, la la la. Why are you already in my list? Oh, because I didn't reset. Um, when I use the enum library, I can have a function called extend enum that will say, hey, take the user property type enum, add the franchise ID, which maps to the string franchise ID. This mapping difference is important because in a lot of Domo's APIs, they use camel case, and I prefer in all of my code base to use snake case. And so not only does the enum give you a standard set of values to choose from, but it allows me to say, hey, I'm going to use snake case for everything. In any case, at the end of the day, after we extend the enum, now I can say, all right, there it is. Franchise ID and store ID are in my list of properties that I can set for a user. Cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and create a new user using this test row. So I have my class called Domo user. The first thing I need to do is make sure that I can create those properties. So I'll say for a property, I want to be able to set the franchise, the store, the employee number, and who that employee reports to. Now the reports to is not an email. It has to be a Domo user ID. Not my random Domo user ID, the ID that Domo assigned. So in order to do that, to find my manager, I am going to use the Domo users class, search for them by email, and then I'm going to keep the first manager that was returned. And so here, just as for for validation, I'm just printing the manager, the email that came back, basically. Okay. So you might be wondering, Jay, what does the user property give me at the end of the day? The user property gives me properly formatted JSON that I can then push into Domo. So that's going to look something like this. Um, I'm going to run the function called create user property. create user property is going to receive the franchise, the employee ID, and the manager email. And the output is going to be something I can send to the Domo APIs, including the person or the Domo entity that this user is going to report to. And again, that's a Domo ID, not the email address. Cool. So these are the list of properties I want to be able to set. Let's actually do that. We're going to write a function called upsert user. It's going to receive a bunch of properties, and we're going to magically make it happen. So I have a function under the Domo users class, or a method rather, called upsert user. It will receive an email address. If I find that email, I'm going to update their display name, role name, and properties. If the user does not exist, I'm going to create a new user. So anywhere in my library where you see the upsert used, well, use it. It's going to be easier than create. Cool. So we're going to start by upserting that user and make sure that they exist. Then we're going to get that list of properties here that we want to update. And then we're going to run a function called Domo user, update their properties, passing in a list of properties that we want to update. Cool. So hopefully this is going to work. We're going to start by printing my test user. So that's the user that I want to upsert. We're going to call the upsert user function, passing in their new role, franchise, store, la la la, and then do a little pretty print. Cool. And so I can see all of the properties of this user. We can see their display name, who they report to, and so on. If I pop over into Domo, where is Domo? Domo is here somewhere. Yeah, if I pop into Domo and search for CEO, here's this person recently updated with all of the properties set, including their franchise ID is 0 and their store ID is 0. These are duplicates that don't matter, and we can see who they report to. They report to me. Then I have a function that will upsert all of my users at the same time. And let's just see. These are the printouts of the managers they were mapped to because I was having problems earlier. Oh man, don't give me an error. That's interesting. So I have some random error that I don't understand why I've got it. So the other way I can run an update is sequentially. This will run them all at this code here will update all of my users at the same time. I think the problem is related to updating the manager and who people report to. So I'm going to run this sequentially. So now I can see it feels like it's running much slower, but that's just because it's processing each user one at a time, and then hopefully this won't throw any errors. And success. Okay, so things went as expected. I think if I think the problem is that when it tried to create the person that reports into the mid-level person, that mid-level person didn't exist at the time that the other one was created, and that might be what's throwing the credit error. Anyway, um, yeah. So there's There's your solution. How can I update users, bulk update users using a script implemented? The last bit's here about how can I create dynamic groups and dynamic PDP policies. This is the kind of thing that you would only have to set up once, right? You have to set up the rule for how you create the dynamic group or set up the rule for how you create that dynamic PDP policy. And then as users are added that meet these criteria from these managed properties, these would just kind of update. I hope that was helpful. Go forth, do great things, and have a great break. Catch you guys later.